Hi everyone, my name is Professor Adam Alter. I'm going to be the professor leading the product sprint in May. I hope I'll see many of you there. I want to give you a taster of what we'll be doing in the sprint. We'll be looking at innovation and in particular looking at niche finding. So looking at a crowded marketplace, finding a niche, a gap that hasn't yet been filled, and then working out whether the product we have in mind is actually going to be a success, whether it's going to attract a market, whether it's going to attract interest. And I want to look at a case study, which is what we'll be doing also through the sprint. We'll look at some really strong examples, companies that have been very successful doing this, and then sometimes companies that have been less successful. So the product I want to focus on is Clubhouse. So Clubhouse is interesting for two particular reasons. There are two innovations that make Clubhouse distinct in the social media space. One is that it relies on voice rather than visual imagery. And the second is that it relies on live content. So you have to consume that voice content live. Those are two important innovations. They have strengths and weaknesses. My feeling overall, though, is I'm pretty bearish about Clubhouse. I think in the long run, it's not going to succeed. And I want to explain why those two features, voice and live, are essentially liabilities. When we're talking about social media, if you want to engage people, if you want them to find the platform interesting and for them to keep returning to it, a lot of evidence suggests that you have to make them interested in the content that meets their eyes within about 3 seconds. If they reach the 5 second, 7 second, 10-second mark and they're not interested yet, their interest is going to drop dramatically and they're going to leave. And we know that, a lot of social media platforms are very good at doing this. Facebook is good at this. Instagram's good at this. Snapchat's good at this. YouTube's good at this. Twitter's good at this. Wherever you happen to live, whichever is your favorite social media app, after you watch this video, if you go to one of those platforms, think of your interest level as a 1 when you begin. See how long it takes you to get to a 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, the top half of your scale. And I imagine, given how well the algorithm knows you by now, it's not going to take long at all. It'll be a matter of seconds. Maybe the first piece of content that hits your eyeballs will be interesting to you. Now notice that that is a visual content. It'll be a snapshot of a video, or it'll be a picture someone's posted, or it'll be the written word. We process all of that stuff in parallel and automatically, which means we can process a lot of it at once. It doesn't take a lot of cognitive or mental effort. And it's something we do automatically, which means that we can't even unprocess it. What I mean is if I put a word in front of you now and ask you to read that word, you'll be able to do that really easily. If I ask you not to read that word, you're still going to read it. It's impossible to see letters once you know how to read and not read them, not actually process them as letters. And that's going to be true about visual content in general. So that's a real strength of those social media platforms. Now, if you compare that to Clubhouse, extremely, extremely different. It's at the other end of the spectrum. With Clubhouse, you are processing the spoken word. That is done in serial. You can only process 1 word at a time. If you hear 2 words at a time, there's massive interference. And so it takes a lot of effort and energy to process that content. And so for you to hit that same 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 level of interest with the spoken word, it takes a lot more time. That's a really big liability. The second thing is that this live feature has a lot of strengths to it. The fact that you're consuming live content has certain strengths. If you think about watching a sporting event, let's say you watched Gonzaga-Baylor, the NCAA basketball final, watching that live is different from watching it, even if it's delayed by 1, 2, or 3 minutes. If I show you a feed and tell you this happened 2 or 3 minutes ago, your enjoyment level will drop. If you're a sports fan and you've watched live sports, you'll know the difference between watching it live and even delayed by a couple of minutes is huge. So there is a benefit to making live content. It feels fresh, it feels scarce, it feels rare, it feels like it's catering to you in that very moment. And so that can be a strength. But in the social media world, that's a massive liability. Because what you need to do, if this is your product, is you have to have lots and lots and lots of content generated. Enough that you have enough interesting content for all your users, but also it has to be just in time. It has to be content that when I arrive on the platform, not only is there interesting content there, but it's about to begin within the next few seconds. If it's going to begin in 10 minutes, I'm not going to sit there and wait for that content to begin. If it began 10 minutes ago, I'm too late. And so this is a huge problem from just a sheer quantity perspective. Having enough content that's interesting, that's always there when people arrive on the platform in that moment. That's a huge problem for live content. If you compare that to something like YouTube or Netflix, that content is always waiting for you. It's hungry for you, and as soon as you arrive and you decide you want to watch it, it's there and it's available. You can certainly watch live content on YouTube, and you can watch live broadcasts on YouTube, but that's not how the platform lives. Now, if Clubhouse were to say, you know what, we are deciding that we just can't produce enough content that's live, what we're going to do is we're going to record all our content and make it available that way, then it becomes less innovative. It's no longer covering a niche. It's really just an inferior podcasting platform. It's the poor man's or poor woman's podcasting platform because the production values are lower. People aren't going to want to listen to something that's not live because that's where the juice comes in. That's where it feels like you're getting something that's scarce, that's rare, that's important to you in that moment. And so it then, as an innovation, doesn't live in that niche world anymore. You could think about this, think about the tea world. Think about the tea market. You've got hot tea on the one end of the spectrum. You've got cold tea on the other end of the spectrum. There is a huge part of the temperature spectrum in the middle between hot tea and iced tea that is not covered. There is no marketplace for warm tea. Now, just because that marketplace, tea that's somewhere in the middle of iced tea and hot tea, has not yet been created, doesn't mean that it's a good idea to find that niche. And I think Clubhouse is like this too. Just because there doesn't exist or didn't exist before Clubhouse, a social media app based on voice that was live, doesn't mean that finding that kind of tepid tea market was a good way to go. And I think you're starting to see this sort of ring through in its download numbers. So if you look at the downloads for Clubhouse, on the 1st of January, there were 70,000 downloads from the iOS store. There were 200,000 on the 1st of February. So a big jump from 70 to 200,000. And then another big jump from 2 weeks later on Feb 15, there were 500,000 downloads. So we see this big rise, this precipitous rise. After that, things don't look so good though. From 500,000 downloads on Feb 15th, 2 weeks later on the 1st of March, we're down to 150,000. On the 15th of March, down to 90,000. And on the 1st of April, down to about 50 or 60,000. So if you look at the shape, it's like a bell curve or a mountain, typical mountain where it rises really precipitously and then drops just as fast. And so I think that's because the platform essentially is not going to succeed in the long run. That's the kind of analysis we'll be doing when we look at other products. We'll be looking at products across a ton of industries. Again, hope to see many of you there and hope to meet you then. All the best.